Every day, 6,300 people die from work-related accidents or diseases. That's one life lost every 15 seconds. But here's the good news, 99% of these tragedies are preventable. Whether you're on a construction site, in a factory, or at a desk, today's video is your survival guide to spotting and stopping common workplace hazards. Let's get started. Alright, let's talk about something we've all experienced. The slip, trip, and fall. It's not just about bruised egos, these spills can lead to serious injuries. Step 1, keep your workspace clean. Spills happen, but letting that coffee puddle sit there is just asking for trouble. Clean it up, mark the area, and make sure everyone knows it's slick. And for those of you on the front lines, wearing the right footwear is crucial. Good, sturdy, slip-resistant shoes are non-negotiable. Think of them as your first line of defense against gravity. Now let's talk ladders. The three-point contact rule is so important. 2 hands and 1 foot, always in contact with the ladder, no exceptions. Your body will thank you for it. Amazon had a problem with slips and falls in their warehouses. They invested in anti-fatigue mats for their employees who were on their feet all day. Simple solution, right? But it worked. They saw a 40% reduction in slips and falls. That's huge! Not only did it improve safety for their workers, but it also saved them a ton of money on workers' compensation claims. So, remember, folks, slips, trips, and falls might seem like minor inconveniences, but they can have serious consequences. By taking a few simple precautions, you can stay upright, stay productive, and most importantly, stay safe. Alright, let's talk machines. From construction sites to factory floors, these things are the backbone of how we get things done, but they're also powerful and potentially dangerous if you don't treat them with respect. First up, lockout tagout. If you're doing any kind of maintenance or repair on a machine, this is non-negotiable. Lockout tagout means de-energizing the equipment completely before you even think about sticking your hands in there. And don't just assume it's off. Use a lock and a tag to make it crystal clear that the machine is off limits. Now I know what you're thinking, Mike, that's common sense. And you're right, it is. But you wouldn't believe how many accidents happen because someone took a shortcut or assumed something was safe when it wasn't. And speaking of technology, some companies are taking safety to a whole new level with AI guardians. I'm talking about sensors and cameras that can actually detect when a worker is too close to a machine and automatically shut it down before an accident can happen. But even with all the fancy technology in the world, nothing beats proper training. Studies have shown that proper training can reduce machinery-related injuries by as much as 60%. So, if you're an employer, make sure your people are properly trained on the equipment they're using. And if you're an employee, don't be afraid to speak up if you need more training. Alright, let's talk about the nasty stuff. Hazardous substances. Chemicals, fumes, dust. These things can be silent killers if you don't know what you're dealing with. First things first, personal protective equipment, or PPE. This is non-negotiable, people. Gloves, masks, goggles, whatever you need to create a barrier between you and the hazard. And don't just grab any old mask, make sure it's the right one for the job. A simple dust mask won't cut it if you're dealing with toxic fumes. And speaking of fumes, ventilation is key. If you're working in a poorly ventilated area, make sure you've got proper exhaust systems in place or at least some good old-fashioned open windows. Those fumes can sneak up on you, and before you know it, you're feeling lightheaded and disoriented. Trust me, I've been there, and it's not a fun experience. Now let's talk labels. Those symbols and warnings on chemical containers aren't there for decoration. They're there to tell you exactly what you're dealing with and how to handle it safely. Red means flammable, so keep it away from heat sources. The skull and crossbones, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. It means toxic, so avoid contact at all costs. And then there's the tree and the fish. That's for environmental hazards, so dispose of it properly. So remember, folks, when it comes to hazardous substances, knowledge is your best defense. Alright, let's talk about something that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. Ergonomics. Ergonomics is about designing your workspace and your work habits to prevent injuries. Let's start with the obvious, your desk setup. If you're hunched over your keyboard all day, you're asking for a world of pain in your neck, back, and wrists. Make sure your monitor is at eye level, your keyboard is at a comfortable height, and your chair provides good support. And don't forget about your feet. Use a footrest if you need to. Now let's talk about lifting. We all have to lift things from time to time, whether it's a box of files or a heavy piece of equipment. The key is to lift with your legs, not your back. Bend your knees, keep your back straight, and use your leg muscles to do the heavy lifting. And if something is too heavy to lift safely on your own, ask for help. There's no shame in that. But it's not just about the big movements. Even small, repetitive motions can lead to injuries over time. That's why it's important to take breaks and stretch regularly. Get up and move around every 30 minutes or so. Stretch your wrists, your neck, your back, anything to break up the monotony and prevent those aches and pains from setting in. So, listen to your body, take breaks when you need them, and don't try to power through the pain. It's not worth it. So, remember folks, ergonomics is about more than just fancy chairs and keyboards. It's about designing your workspace and your work habits to prevent injuries, both physical and mental. Alright, let's talk about something that can be both powerful and deadly: electricity. We rely on it for just about everything these days, but it's important to remember that electricity doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're an electrician with years of experience or a homeowner changing a light bulb. If you're not careful, it can kill you just as easily. First things first, never assume a wire is dead. Always, and I mean always, test it with a voltage tester before you touch it. And don't just rely on your eyes. Electricity is invisible, so you need to use the proper tools to make sure it's safe. Now let's talk about outlets. If you've got old, two-pronged outlets in your home or workplace, it's time to upgrade to GFCI outlets, especially in areas where water is present, like kitchens and bathrooms. GFCI stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter, and these outlets are designed to shut off the power in a fraction of a second if they detect a ground fault, which could save you from a fatal shock. And speaking of shocks, let's talk about cords. Frayed cords, damaged plugs, overloaded circuits, these are all recipes for disaster. Inspect your cords regularly, replace any that are damaged, and don't overload your circuits. Alright, let's talk about something nobody wants to think about: fires and explosions. They're terrifying, unpredictable, and can happen in the blink of an eye. But here's the thing: most fires and explosions are preventable. That's right, preventable. It all comes down to being prepared, not paranoid. First things first, fire extinguishers. You need to have them, you need to know where they are, and you need to know how to use them. Remember the acronym PASS. Pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep from side to side. It could mean the difference between a small fire and a catastrophic one. Now let's talk about flammable materials. If you're working with anything that can burn, you need to store it properly. That means keeping it away from heat sources, open flames, and anything else that could ignite it. And don't forget about ventilation. Flammable vapors can build up in enclosed spaces, creating a ticking time bomb. And speaking of ticking time bombs, let's talk about emergency exits. In the event of a fire or explosion, you need to be able to get out of there quickly and safely. Alright, let's talk about a tough one: workplace violence. It's a scary thought, but the reality is, it can happen anywhere. From hospitals to retail stores, schools to office buildings, no workplace is immune. But the good news is, there are things we can do to protect ourselves and our colleagues. First and foremost, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those red flags, whether it's a disgruntled employee, an agitated customer, or someone loitering around the building. Report any suspicious activity to your supervisor or security personnel immediately. And speaking of reporting, it's crucial to create a workplace culture where people feel comfortable speaking up if they feel threatened or unsafe. That means having clear policies in place, providing training on how to recognize and respond to workplace violence, and fostering an environment of open communication. Now let's talk about de-escalation techniques. Sometimes the best way to handle a potentially violent situation is to de-escalate it before it escalates. That means staying calm, speaking in a soothing tone, and trying to understand the person's perspective. It's not always easy, but it can be incredibly effective. Workplace hazards are everywhere, but so are solutions. Start today. Download our free manuals and safety checklist in the description, and subscribe to turn your job into a safety-first zone. Hit the bell so you never miss our next video. Remember, your safety isn't optional, it's essential. Stay sharp, stay safe.